Well, thank you for having me. What she said with logos, and a picture of me with slightly different colour hair. Yep, I've got a book out. I think it's on Mary's reading list. It's very splendid, do buy it. But what I'm going to speak to you about today, I think to sort of set the scene really and provide some stimulation, is a brand that took up 5 years of my life, and I've been talking about for 20 years. And I sometimes feel a bit like Frank Sinatra being asked to sing My Way again. But, you know, I guess it is better to be famous for something. And I think what means I don't sort of hang up those boots, as it were, or put down that mic, is because it's a strategy that the brand developed. I developed it with a team of colleagues 20 years ago, 2004 in fact. But it's still the same strategy for the brand. It's lasted. And the day they stop it is the day I will do a sort of farewell tour on this gig of talking about the Dove campaign. So just to sort of recap for those of you maybe who weren't born when we began this journey, it started in Europe. This was one of the first ads that ran in April 2024. This was one of the ads that I led the development of. We were very lucky that it was for a product like firming lotion, because actually had it been for deodorant, I think we probably would have just fallen at the first hurdle, but it seemed to be a very a product that was particularly relevant to the strategy that we developed. I'm going to come back to the strategic thinking. This is just, you know, kind of where we are now. This is one of the other ads that ran. Then we did a global master brand campaign about 6 to 9 months afterwards. That was the first time we used the words campaign for real beauty. This ran all over the world. This was a young lady who actually worked at Ogilvy, New York, called Tabitha. If anybody ever claims that they did this campaign, show them these ads and ask them to name the women, and it'll sort out those who were there from those who weren't there. The lovely Irene Sinclair, who was 98. I imagine she's sadly no longer with us, but she was our wizened and wonderful brand ambassador for the global campaign. Here she is on a poster in Times Square. Here is the lovely Tabitha on a poster in Toronto. And it starts to slightly age this campaign because we had text voting. Now, you'd have lovely digital posters now, wouldn't you? It'd be fantastic. And here we are in Taiwan with a Nokia 3210 text voting on that poster there, next to the one for a mobile phone on the left, to vote to whether we think she's, you know, fat or fabulous or fat or fit in the British vernacular. We had massive conniptions about whether people would vote not the way we hoped, and we thought we have to accept it, but we will be out there voting all night if necessary just to get a bit of... But people did tend to vote in a fairly even-handed way. I was also the poor human that had to develop the first global brand website ever. It wasn't a thing back then. Seems amazing now, doesn't it? And we created the Campaign for Real Beauty website. Lots of people think this woman is me. I don't see the resemblance, but lots of people said, "You're in that Dove ad. I remember you. You had the long grey hair." And I never had long grey hair. But what we did find was that when people saw this, they absolutely poured their heart out, and we realised how resonant it was with women. So, you know, that was sort of how the campaign began. And then 20 years on, as I've said, it is still going strong. And a massive campaign in 2023 to detox your feed. The impact of social media on young women is massive. And then they formed a partnership with Nike, which was actually really rather wonderful, because Nike was one of the brands that we wanted to be like when we started this journey. And then last year they were in the Super Bowl, an ad in the Super Bowl, which was incredibly similar to our strategy video that I will show you. So it's taken 20 years to do something I always thought we'd do one day when we developed the strategy. It's one of the most successful and awarded campaigns in history. It has won, at the big advertising festival, the Grand Prix for creative work, but also for effectiveness. Unilever is not a stupid business if it wasn't working. they wouldn't continue with this strategy. People always will say to me, "Oh yes, but I don't think you'll find it worked in, in some minor country in the stance." I won't name one because there was always somebody from that country in the room. It doesn't matter. It worked where it mattered. It worked in the big markets everywhere in the world, in Japan, in Brazil, in the US, in Germany, France, Spain, UK. It was effective, and the brand now turns over 8 billion euros. It's a big old brand, and when we began it was 2 billion, so it is a brand that has grown over that 20-year period. So, it has worked, which is gratifying. It was scary when we did it because it was so radical, but it has actually done its stuff. So, where did it begin? Well, it began in a room in Ireland where we were on a sort of off-site leadership course. And we had on the wall all of our competitive ads. We're looking at the competition, and these were the ads that we saw. And the group of us, there were about 5 of us, I think 5 or 6 of us, 3 women, a couple of guys, and that was the sort of master brand leadership team. I was one of them. We were looking at the competition. So L'Oreal, Nivea, Olay, Pantene, Neutrogena, mass market brand in the US, a bit posher over here. Shiseido, mass market in Japan. And you look at all those ads and you go, God, they all look the same. I mean, teenage girls retouched to within an inch of their lives, as thin as anything, more in need of good lunch than perhaps the ambulance that were being conveyed. But what we just felt in our gut, the women that were sitting there, were like, oh, these ads make us feel crappy. They really do. And it started with that instinct from us. Now, if you go to Mark Ritson's wonderful lectures about this campaign, and I have so often volunteered to actually come and tell the real story, he will say that the Dove team did research and they found that globally only 2% of women found they were beautiful. We did not do that research at this time. We did it for PR when we launched the campaign 2 years later. So we started with a hypothesis. Now, we didn't bet a $2 billion brand on a hunch. We found a different way to validate that hypothesis. We went to talk to psychologists. We went to speak to the likes of Susie Orbach and Naomi Wolf. I always say she's Naomi Klein, Naomi Wolf, and talked about kind of what they understood about women and their feelings about the way they looked. And we were told, you are so right. We can prove that if women look at a beauty magazine, their self-esteem drops several points before and after. Fiji had no commercial television when it started. Anorexia was non-existent. It then became a thing. Everybody wanted to dye their hair blonde like the girls they saw in all the American TV commercials. So we were so right about that insight, and we did not need the customer to tell us that. We got to people who were experts in the customer, so we knew we were on something. We had a long time talk, and this is where I think some of the debate about social purpose is becoming ridiculous, because we were like, well, hang on a minute, we've got this insight, but we're not about to open hospitals for people with eating disorders. We're in the beauty business. How on earth can we help this thing because we're in the business that we're in? And we had a big light bulb moment when we were told, I think by Susie Orbach, that if you're treating a woman for low self-esteem, one of the first things a psychologist will tell her is to go and have your hair done, have your nails done, have a nice, lovely, smelly bath, take self-care. So we were like, wow, what we sell is good for this with women. It's not in conflict. So we've got that intersection between that sense of purpose and what we make for a living. And I think, honestly, it's when those go so far apart, you can't even make a connection, that it goes badly wrong. And I remember kind of the Good to Great book about, kind of looking at companies that had a purpose over and above what they made. and resurrected this slide which shows the stock returns over a cumulative period for those companies who stand for something bigger versus companies that are very, very similar in every other regard but don't. And it was a 7-fold increase in performance in terms of the stock price. So that was quite a useful thing to know when you're going to land something quite radical on an unsuspecting organisation. We've just been sent off to figure the brand out on a leadership course in Ireland, and we're going to come back with something a bit much. So we started to articulate our Dove positioning. So, you know, our first thing is we're not anti-beauty. You know, we want people to feel beautiful, but we want people to feel beautiful by liking themselves, taking care of themselves, creating the personal style of beauty. Unfortunately, today's definition of beauty is far too narrow, and it makes the game less joyful and causes real problems. Now, this is word for word what was in the documents at the time. And we realised that the enemy really was the stereotypes, you know, that we were against stereotypes, we weren't against beauty. So only thin is beautiful, only young is beautiful, only blonde straight hair is beautiful, only tall. I was really pleased that tall was beautiful. I was terribly ugly. I'm 6'1". I'm like, hurrah, I've got one. Only physical features count, only perfect physical features, you've got to be perfect. That pressure to be perfect. So our idea, as we articulated at the time, was diversity. We believe that beauty comes in different shapes, sizes and ages, and that real beauty can be genuinely stunning. Again, word for word what was in our strategy document at the time. As was our mission, we want to make more women feel beautiful every day by widening the stereotypical view of beauty and inspiring women, not to have them aspire, but to inspire them to take great care of themselves. So that's how we got that connection between what we made and what we believed in, if you like, or what we discovered about the impact of images on women. Now, it was quite funny, because whenever we would explain this to women, they would be like, this is brilliant, Go Sisters, how can I help? I'm in. We would explain it to guys, and they would go, you don't think you're beautiful? Of course you're beautiful, you're women. What's the matter with you, in brackets? And we would go, well, we don't think we are. We spend a lot of the day worrying about the size of our asses. You know, complete and utter bafflement about this insight. They just didn't see it. So we're like, that's going to be a tricky one, because most of the senior leadership at Unilever are men at that time. Some women, not many. So we're like, well, how do we do this? I said, do you know what we've got to do? We've got to make it personal for them. We've got to bring it home. And so we sort of got organised like the mafia. I love the Kurt Vonnegut quote. You know, it is possible for good to triumph over evil, but the angels have to be organised like the mafia. So we've got, this is a dramatic reconstruction of our stakeholder management plan, some genuine, some... so we were like, who are we going to go and see? Who have we got to convince? You know, Niall Fitzgerald was the Unilever chairman. We're not talking about, you know, kind of people that, you know, weren't significant. You know, we had to get everyone from the top down. And of course, we're not daft. We know if the chairman likes it, everybody will like it, won't they? You know, there's part of that sort of, you know, hierarchical impact in big companies. So who's going to go? You know, what are they going to take? So we created a video featuring the daughters of all of these executives. So it started by Sylvia Lanyardo, who was the wonderful person at Unilever. I was the agency person. Phoning them up, phoning their wife, getting the home phone numbers from HR. You know, 20 years ago you could do that. Now, but we would have done it. We'd have done it somehow. And she went and phoned the wives and said, you have daughters, you mustn't tell your husbands, we're on a secret project, not one of them split, so, you know, Go Sisters, yet again. We're doing a secret project, we've got daughters, can we interview them? And then for every meeting, we created, you know, here's the strategy, this is what we've discovered, here's the insight video, there's quite a lot of slides I haven't shown you, here's the whole thing about what we should do and why. All the research we have done, not the beauty thing, but other stuff. You know, the purpose, it's good for business, all that. And then if they were sort of looking, as most men were, completely baffled by this point, and if you don't want to do this, here are 12 more reasons why you should do it. And we would then play a video which featured their children. You know, we got everybody's buy-in, and it was that, I think, that made such a big difference to people saying yes and expecting something pretty big and pretty different on an enormous brand. It wasn't titchy like Marmite. You know, it was going to affect the stock price if it was a disaster. So, you know, all kudos to Unilever for being super brave and buying a very bold strategy. I can't even think of a good Radio 4 change of gear here, but that's sort of what we did and slightly how we got there. And I do think, in a way, you know, using Dove as like the example of what everybody should be doing is a bit unfair, because you know, the strategy was something of tremendous social import. And that was our positioning, if you like, this, you know, honest beauty. So I think sometimes it's quite hard to draw exact parallels with what any brand might be doing. So I thought it'd be worth talking a little bit about, you know, if you're not a brand that's lucky enough to have that at the epicenter of what you're all about, what else you might be looking at. And taking my favourite brand strategy framework from the book, it was a simplified version of the one we had at Mondelez actually, to figure out a brand, you sort of need to think and bring four things together. The customer insight, not unusual, it's not rocket science, it's always what we've needed, but something pretty deep, like the one we had for Dove, which is the beauty industry makes me feel ugly. And, you know, what have you got? It's the artist formerly known as the USP, arguably. You know, what have you got that the customer wants that you're pretty good at? If you try and be unique, you'll either find dancing on the head of a pin, or you just won't get there, or you'll be copied. But what have you got that the customer wants that's relevant to them? And then this notion of what makes you different, and what made us different was the real women thing for Dove. The right to win was sort of honest, you know, was really about, you know, kind of delivering on our promises, doing what we said we'd do as products. And then the one I think that does become especially relevant in this area of social context, of social, you know, kind of impact, is the cultural context that you might pick that has a connection with your brand and an impact on your customer. And if we were to retrofit this framework on the work that we did for Dove, the bit there would be, you know, that the stereotypes, you know, the prevalence of stereotypes in the world that we have to live with that make us feel so bad. Then you pull all those together and come up with your thing. With Dove it would be honest beauty, and then you'd write a manifesto. But finding that cultural area that's out there in the world, the zeitgeist if you want to be grand, that affects your customer directly and will connect with what you make, do or sell, is really good work if you want to build a reputation for having some societal impact. You know, if you're a loo cleaner, or if you're in, you know, some other, you know, form of business where maybe it's not such an obvious connection, there will be something that you can find that's out there that customers are engaging, that can connect with your brand, and your brand will be stronger for considering that as you build what you're all about. So that's the bit that I think, if you're not lucky enough to be a Dove where you've got that in the absolute front and centre, you can still find something that is connected to that idea. Obviously, for all you marketers, you know, once you've got this idea, you need to layer it into absolutely everything you do. You know, what you do, what you smell like, look like, taste like, how you speak to people, what products you launch. Everything you do should build that brand. And this is the sort of retrofitted version of that for Dove that we've just seen. Our insight, the beauty industry makes women feel ugly. What have we got that, you know, will be helpful? We deliver on our promises. How are we different? We're going to use real women, not models. What's the context? And it was really that was the big driver of what we did, the pressure to conform to beauty ideals. And what we stood for after we started with diversity, but eventually that migrated to honest beauty. And I read the manifesto, which didn't change. We just got a bit more bold about our reason for being and the offer to the customer. And, you know, everything we did, you know, did serve that. You know, when we used real women, we didn't retouch them. We paid them the same as we would pay a model. We treated them incredibly well when they came to the set. You know, all of those things that the brand did. The product strategy was not to have emotive ingredients in it, for example, all of those kind of things. You know, the sensory equities that we developed were all, you know, white and creamy and you know, kind of pure and sort of clean looking. The tone and manner, it was very much about eye level. We didn't patronise, we didn't try and say you should be this or you should be that. We were very much, you know, we girls, let's face it, we girls. And the product strategy came out of that. No emotive ingredients, that was a huge piece of work to do in the beauty industry, huge. But also, you know, even the launch of a product range for older women, you know, was not anti-aging, it was pro-age, you know, so there were lots of things that we did to build all that. And, you know, we did all sorts of other things. We had a schools programme about, you know, kind of how images are faked and, you know, they carry on and on doing things that help in the real world that's sort of almost beyond marketing. And I sort of thought I'd also mention a brand that got it badly wrong, where they decided they wanted to be for the cool kids, which is Abercrombie and Fitch. I don't know if you've heard about their sort of terrible upset. They wanted, you know, to be, you know, clean-cut, American, for the cool jock type kids. And then they started in store to only allow those people working there that looked like this to be in front of the customers, and all the people who perhaps, you know, might wear religious dress or were not the same colour were actually in the back storeroom. And somebody figured this out and took them to court and won. And you go, yes, you know, because you know, you do have to bring a brand to life, but doing it in a way that is, you know, lacks all morality is just dreadful. This is almost at the other end of the spectrum, I think, to what we did with Dove, which was generally honourable. We didn't get everything right, but we really stuck to our guns. But they broke the law, and they were fined a hell of a lot of money, and I hope that their brand did worse because of it. So that's an example of where a brand strategy does get brought to life, but gets brought to life in a way that's sort of morally wrong. So, you know, that's the sort of intro, really. This is the Dove story in short. Another example that I think is interesting, where brands go off the rails. And then I thought, you know, given I get the floor to start with, you know, sort of what do I think about it all? I think for those of you who've ever worked in marketing, you know, at the end of the day, you've got to support the organisational objectives first and foremost. The job of marketing is to sell the thing mostly. If you've got a boatload of kettles heading for the docks at Southampton that's going to hit the stores, you better be doing kettle campaigns to deliver those sales. At the end of the day, you know, that is your job as a marketer, is to, and it might be that selling isn't the job of the market. It might be fundraising for a charity, or it might be, you know, improving the reputation of your local hospital in the NHS. You know, all of these organisations have marketing. But, you know, that's, you're first and foremost, you're there for that. But then the first responsibility of a human being is to honour your fellow human beings. And I think that's a, you know, kind of a very broad way of describing it. So those two things should not be in conflict, ideally, but sometimes there are tensions. And, you know, those tensions have to be thought about, and they have to be thought about sensitively, and you have to, you know, act and do the right thing for both. And where I would, you know, sort of add something that's sort of a bit less sort of motherhood and apple pie is you can do anything, but you can't do everything. And that's where I think picking your cultural context that you're going to connect with is a good start, because it will give you guidance about where you feel you should be piling in, or you should have a view, or the press ring you for comment, because you're going to be the brand that talks about, you know, palm oil, or you're going to be talking about food waste or other things that are relevant to your customer and to your brand. And if you've got that cultural context defined and everybody in the organisation gets it, then you're not going to be dealing with every latest hoo-ha, and you will know that yes, we are going to be, you know, more in this direction than that one. There will be some general things that will apply to any businesses, but it does help that brand have a bit more of a magnetic north to guide where you're going to lean in and where you're going to just maybe do the minimum, or you're going to stay well out of it, you know, if it's completely in the opposite direction. So, you know, find your brand's purpose. How do you find that? Get a clear strategy and stay close to that would be my advice on how do you deal with some of the social issues. And I would just say pick your brand battles, because you can't do everything, and you can get so distracted and so into so much trouble and difficulty if you just, you know, you've got people, you know, responding to everything that's just blowing up in the world. So that's my view. You know, people would be very, very welcome to madly disagree with it, because, you know, it's a pragmatic one, I think, which tends to be my approach to most things. Pragmatic idealist. That's me done. Will that do? And then we have our